very briefly, let's talk about some common leveling mistakes. So as you're leveling the field, remember we talked about the difference between mistakes and errors. So errors with experience can be minimized. They can never be 100% eliminated. But mistakes can, because errors are due to things that we can only control to a certain point, right? Such as how good our eyes are at like looking at reading the rods and all of that stuff. But there are mistakes that can be avoided. So one of them is misreading the rod. And interestingly enough, we just took, as I'm recording this video, we recently took a group of students to do the leveling lab. And at the end, their calculations were just completely off. And they later discovered that they had been reading the rod wrong. And you're like, how can you possibly read the rod incorrectly? That sounds really stupid. And the answer is it's actually a little trickier than it seems, because you are, and it's the same reason with, it's the same problem with like tape and horizontal measurements, is that you see a 4 and you see a 9 right next to it, and you think, well, that's 4.9, but you don't realize that it's the 9 belongs to the 3 that was before it. I don't know if that made any sense, but so one recommendation when viewing your the rod through the eyepiece is to make sure you look at the number on top and at the bottom, because for whatever reason, if you just kind of focus on this one number, it can be more of like a distraction type of mistake. So it sounds silly, but it happens more often than you would think. Next, moving turning point. So what does this mean? What this means is that if you're careless, you can move the turning point by accident. So you can hold the rod at one point while the instrumentation takes the foresight reading, and then while the level is being moved to a new position, the rodman could put the level down for a while or whatever. And as you're getting ready to do the backside, the rodman could hold the rod at a different point, which can be a new location, and therefore can be an entirely different elevation. So pay attention to that. Field note mistake. So this happens no matter what kind of measurement you're doing, and that just means that as you are being dictated or as you're reading something and someone's taking notes, so you can accidentally miswrite a number. Also, having difficult to read handwriting doesn't help. So 1s become 7s and 3s become 8s and whatnot. And mistakes with the extended rod. So sometimes, and you'll see this when you use R's, you have to extend it fully, and there's a way in which you could accidentally end up not doing that and think that you did. It kind of has to click. So in any case, be careful. All right, so now let's talk about errors. So again, errors can definitely be minimized, although there's always going to be a little bit of an error no matter what you do. Oops, I clicked. But anyway, level rod not vertical. So that's, so as we talked about it earlier at some point, most rods come with its own rod level to make it, to make sure that it's actually level. And you would think, well, why don't I just put it against the ground? Well, sometimes remember that you'll be on sloping ground that is not level. So if you put it against the ground, it will be crooked, and the reading will be wrong. Now, sometimes if it's very sloped, you're like, well, I obviously won't put it against the ground. But sometimes the ground is just like barely sloping, or sometimes you're just on top of like a little mound of dirt or something. And if that's the case, you really have to trust your level to make sure that your rod is perfectly straight, because otherwise the reading is going to come off wrong. The next one is settling of the level rod. So I mean, it's kind of the same. So an important thing is that you that you're careful with where you place your level rod, and you don't let it sink into the ground, if that makes sense. So you should hold the rod on a stake. That's why we use stakes, is you nail them to the ground, you put it on top of it, so that your rod won't like sink into the dirt. Weather conditions, so things like mud, snow, ice, obviously mess it up. So sometimes, let's say that there's like snow in the ground, and snow, firm snow, you might be measuring from where the snow is, but that's not actually the elevation of the ground where you're in. So that's another thing to take into account. Same thing when it's muddy or whatever. Incorrect rod length. So in this case, if your rod has been damaged for whatever reason, or if it has been, if it's not, how do I say this? If the extension is not all the way, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the mistake, but it could be an error because of more of a, like a kink or something. You know, a lot of these errors sometimes sound like mistakes, but anyway. The backside and the foresight distance not equal. So the distance between the backside and the foresight should be kept equal for a particular setup. There shouldn't be any errors. If they are equally distant, there should be no error caused by the Earth's curvature because they will cancel each other out. So if your backside is substantially shorter than your foresight, then that means that if there is sufficient distance for there to be an issue with the curvature of the Earth, then one side would get affected and they wouldn't cancel each other out. Okay, next one. The bubble not centered on the level. So one of the trickiest part about using a level is to keep it level, right? To use a bubble and keep it centered. Now, sometimes it's easy to achieve, but it's not so easy to keep in that spot. So because of various reasons, maybe your tripod sinking into the earth, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you accidentally kind of touched it. It can end up being not centered, even though it was at some point. So, yeah, so anyway, just watch out. Improper focusing of the telescope. So if you look at, I don't know, you probably had this experience. There's something called a parallax. And what it is if you're looking, for example, at your car odometer, speedometer, from the side, it looks like you're going a different distance than you actually are. So if you're in the passenger seat and you're looking over, you might be thinking, well, he or she's going well under the speed limit, whereas someone seeing the board from like right in front of it might see the actual speed. So same thing is going on with the telescope. If you don't look at from the right spot, right down the middle, and if you don't focus it properly, then you could end up reading the wrong place. So that's another reason. And the other things are things like heat and wind do weird things to everything around you. So you have to be aware that if you're in a very hot day or a very windy day, that might cause problems. So here's some suggestions for good leveling. Oops, before I do so, here's an image. So this says the smallest reading will occur when the rod is vertical or plumb. So yeah, just know that you're this was an example I think that came with like when they were talking about oh, I see what this is. This doesn't belong here. I was like, why is this here? This is talking about something called waving the rod. So waving the rod, I think is, it says, a method used by some surveyors for ordinary leveling is to require each rodman to hold the level rod so that it touches his or her nose and belt buckle. But this is not as satisfactory as waving the rod. Waving the rod is, it says many surveyors therefore have their rodmen slowly wave or rock the rod toward or away from the instrument and then record the smallest reading observed through the telescope. So it's just a technique that might cause an error. So yeah, that's belonging to that. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk about suggestions for good leveling. So one thing is to anchor tripod legs firmly and on firm ground. Another is to make sure the bubble tube is centered. To take as little time between backside and foresight readings as possible. The reason for that is like if you wait a long time, the weather conditions might change. The legs of the tripod might settle. The rod might have some like issues. People get tired. There's lots of reasons why you might want to just do it as fast as possible. Make sure that all rods have level tubes. And on sloping ground, 2 of the tripod legs should be on the downhill side. You'll learn a lot more about this on the field when you're trying it yourself. It will make a lot more sense. But these are some things to think about.